Hey all, thanks for tuning in. My name is Aditya. I am the head of mobile engineering here at Keyri, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to integrate Firebase with Keyri in an iOS application. Okay, so I'm going to create an application from the Firebase console, select iOS, and this is important. I'm going to make sure that the bundle ID that I use here is going to match the bundle ID of the application that I'm about to create in Xcode in a minute. We're going to go with com.keyri.firebase example. I'm going to click register after leaving those two optional fields blank and download the plist file that we're going to put into our Xcode project. I'll show you that in just a minute. Now, before talking about adding the SDK, what I'm going to do is actually create the Xcode project with the new application that we're setting up. And again, remember that the bundle ID is really important. So com.keyri is our organization. So Firebase example is going to be the name of the application. And as you see, the bundle ID matches exactly what we put into Google. I'm just going to pick a directory for this. And now we have our base application set up. Now, there's a few different ways to actually download the Firebase SDK as well as the Keyri SDK. We're going to need to use both. One option is to use Swift Package Manager as the flow suggests for Firebase, but you can also use CocoaPods, and that's the example that we're going to use. Here is the initialization code that Firebase provides for you using Swift UI, and we're going to go ahead and actually use that code in our application, and I'll show you that in just a moment. All I'm going to do here is just add Keyri and Firebase auth specifically to my pod file. I'm going to run pod install. I do that off screen, but pod install will basically bring down those two pods and set up the dependencies for me. We're in the main application now, and you'll notice that the info.plist that Google has provided is now in the application bundle. The initialization code that they've provided is also now in the main function, and we're calling this Firebase configure function, which actually sets up the instantiation of Firebase and gets everything going. I actually did rename the project off screen, so now the whole project is called Keyri Firebase. Nothing's actually changed, it's just the name of the project itself. We're in the primary view now. This is where the vast majority of the code is pretty much everything except that initialization code, which is back here. That main function that we need to run is the configure, but everything else I'm just keeping in content view. I've built a simple Swift UI view. All we have is just one button, and it's really just going to call this one important function that's going to handle authenticating with Firebase as well as sending off the payload to Keyri so that we can authenticate on the browser. The two important imports here are Keyri pod and Firebase auth. Those are going to bring in all of the required dependencies. So if we go to this function here, what we see is that we have a username and password configured, and we're going to basically just sign in using Firebase's built-in authentication library. We're going to get an auth result and an error. And in this auth result, there is a function called getIDToken. That's going to get us the access token, which combined with the refresh token makes up a large part of the payload that we end up sending to Keyri. So another thing that we need to do is actually calculate the date and get the epoch time plus 1 hour to send as the expiration time. So we basically calculate here the date of the current date, add 1 hour, and convert it to an actual date here. And then we end up grabbing the time interval since 1970. That gives us the epoch time, basically of 1 hour into the future. That's how long this token is active for. We grab the refresh token from the auth result, as well as this T, which is the access token that is given to us as the callback from this getIDToken method here. The rest of this payload is pretty self-explanatory. We have a long description of exactly what we need to put in on our GitHub as well as in the description below, and the GitHub's linked below as well. We basically grab the UID from the auth result as well as whether or not the user is email verified, whether they're anonymous, and then we get some important information from the provider data as well, including display name and the UID. From there, Using Keyri, we can send this dictionary as an encrypted payload through Keyri to the browser. And we have an app key that's configured, and we grab this from the Keyri developer portal. Obviously, you would use the app key that you've created from your application. And all we really have to do is call Easy Keyri auth using the username from up here, the app key, which is configured here, and the payload, which is really just this big dictionary. And Keyri will handle the rest. This Easy Keyri auth function, as you will see, will handle bringing up the QR scanner, scanning the code, encrypting the payload, and sending it off to Keyri. So that's pretty much it. It's really just one function, about 30 lines of code here, and the vast majority of that is honestly just configuring this dictionary. Again, we have the description of this in our GitHub, as well as the source code. You can play around with the test app as well. And yeah, please let us know if you have any questions.